Amidst the deadly silence of the kitchen, Houston's most terrifying man caught her scraping cold truffle risotto off a discarded plate. A single nod from him would have ended her life right then and there. Instead, doing the unthinkable. He pulled out a mahogany chair and looked her dead in the eye. To understand the sheer magnitude of the mistake Alice made that night, you have to understand the world she was hiding in. The Moretti estate, nestled on 60 acres of fortified land just outside of Houston, was less of a home and more of a heavily guarded fortress. It belonged to Gabriel Moretti. At 32, Gabriel had inherited the largest illicit syndicate in the Midwest, ruling over a multi-million-dollar empire of underground casinos, port smuggling rings, and dirty political favors. He was a man spoken of in terrified whispers, calculating, notoriously ruthless, and possessing a heart colder than the Houston winter. Alice Russo was never supposed to be there. Her mother, Maria, was one of the head housekeepers, an invisible woman who scrubbed blood out of Persian rugs and turned a blind eye to the men walking the halls with holstered weapons. When Alice's father died in a mysterious hit-and-run, leaving them drowning in massive, unexplainable debt, Maria had nowhere else to go. She smuggled 19-year-old Alice into the estate, hiding her in the cramped, windowless servants' quarters located in the basement. For 8 agonizing months, Alice lived like a ghost. Her mother's rules were absolute. Never leave the room during the day. Never speak above a whisper. And above all, never let a Moretti see you. To be seen by him, Alice is to cease to exist, Maria would warn, her hands trembling as she brought Alice whatever scraps of food she could sneak away from the kitchens. But survival makes people desperate, and hunger makes them reckless. It was the night of the annual syndicate summit. The estate was crawling with the most dangerous men in the country. For 14 hours, Maria was trapped upstairs, serving top-shelf bourbon and cleaning up shattered crystal from heated arguments. Down in the basement, Alice hadn't eaten in 2 days. The agonizing cramp in her stomach finally overpowered her fear. At 2:45 a.m., assuming the meeting had ended and the bosses had passed out in the guest wings, Alice turned the lock on her door and crept up the service stairs. The industrial kitchen of the estate was the size of a commercial restaurant. Stainless steel countertops gleamed under the dim emergency lights. The aftermath of the summit's feast was scattered everywhere, half-empty bottles of $1,000 wine, untouched lobsters, and trays of decadent, imported food meant for men who took their excess for granted. Alice's hands shook as she approached a silver platter. There, mostly untouched, was a pile of cold truffle risotto and a half-eaten slice of dark chocolate torte. She didn't look for a clean plate. She didn't bother to heat it up. Dropping to the cold tile floor behind the central island, hiding in the shadows, she grabbed a discarded silver spoon and began to eat with the frantic, messy desperation of a starving animal. The food tasted like a miracle. For 3 minutes, she closed her eyes, entirely consumed by the relief of finally eating. She never heard the heavy oak doors swing open. She never heard the heavy, synchronized footsteps of 3 men stepping onto the kitchen tile. We need the south side ports secured by Tuesday. A deep, resonant voice echoed through the cavernous room. The voice was smooth, yet lined with a dangerous gravel that sent an immediate, icy spike of terror straight through Alice's spine. "I'll handle the union boss, Gabriel," another man replied. "If he doesn't sign, I'll take his hands." Alice froze, the silver spoon halfway to her mouth. "Gabriel." She stopped breathing. She pressed her back so hard against the marble island she felt bruised. She prayed to whatever god was listening that they were just passing through to grab a bottle of whiskey and leave. But then, the heavy footsteps stopped. The silence that followed was thick, suffocating, and terrifyingly absolute. Gabriel Moretti possessed the instincts of an apex predator. He didn't need to see her. He sensed the shift in the room's atmosphere. He sensed someone else was breathing his air. "Silvio," Gabriel said, his voice dropping to a deadly, quiet hum. "Check the perimeter of the island." Alice squeezed her eyes shut, tears of absolute panic spilling hot over her cheeks. She heard the distinct, terrifying sound of a leather holster unsnapping. A heavy combat boot rounded the corner. Suddenly, a massive hand gripped her by the hair, dragging her violently out from the shadows and throwing her onto the harsh, fluorescent-lit center of the kitchen floor. Alice gasped, hitting the tile hard. She scrambled backward, her hands stained with chocolate and cold risotto, her oversized, threadbare sweater slipping off her shoulder. She looked up, her chest heaving in absolute terror. Standing above her were two armed bodyguards, their weapons drawn and pointed directly at her chest, and standing between them was Gabriel Moretti. He was strikingly tall, impeccably dressed in a tailored midnight blue suit, his dark eyes unreadable and piercing. He looked down at the pathetic, trembling girl on his floor. He looked at the discarded plate of leftovers she had dragged out with her. The silence stretched for 10 excruciating seconds. Alice waited for the bullet. She waited for him to order her dragged out to the woods. Instead, Gabriel slowly raised his right hand. "Put the guns away," Gabriel commanded. Silvio hesitated. "Boss, she's an intruder." "I said—" Gabriel interrupted, his voice laced with venom. "Put them away." The guards immediately holstered their weapons. Gabriel stepped forward. Alice flinched, bracing for a strike. Instead, Gabriel reached out, grasped the back of a heavy mahogany dining chair set by the chef's counter, and pulled it out. He looked down at her, his expression entirely devoid of pity, replaced entirely by a terrifying, burning intensity. "Get up," Gabriel ordered softly, "and sit down." Nobody moved. The bodyguards exchanged bewildered glances. Gabriel Moretti did not spare rats. He certainly did not pull chairs out for them. Alice's legs felt like lead, but the command in his voice left no room for disobedience. Trembling violently, she pushed herself up from the floor and slowly sat in the mahogany chair. She kept her head bowed, staring at her dirty, food-stained hands, terrified that meeting his eyes would finalize her death sentence. Gabriel didn't look away from her. He calmly unbuttoned his suit jacket, walked around the massive island, and opened the industrial refrigerator. He pulled out a fresh, untouched platter of roasted lamb, a bowl of seasoned potatoes, and a loaf of artisan bread. He brought it all to the counter, setting it directly in front of Alice. Then, he grabbed a clean crystal glass and poured her a glass of filtered water. "Eat," Gabriel said, leaning against the counter opposite her, crossing his arms over his chest. Alice stared at the feast in front of her. I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Please, my mother. She didn't know. Please don't hurt her. I told you to eat. Alice!" Her breath hitched, her head snapped up, finally meeting his dark, calculating gaze. He knew her name. Surprised, Gabriel asked, a dark, cynical smirk playing on his lips. "Did you and Maria really think you could hide in my house for 8 months without my security team flagging the extra water usage, without my cameras picking up the blind spots, I know everything that happens in my empire. Alice. Down to the exact number of breaths drawn under my roof. Alice's blood ran cold. He had known. The entire time she thought she was clever, creeping through the shadows. Gabriel Moretti had been watching her. Then why? She stammered, her hunger entirely forgotten. Why let us stay? Why didn't you kill me? Gabriel's eyes darkened, shifting from cold amusement to something deeply intense and possessive. Because, Alice, your father was Arthur Russo, and your father didn't die in a random hit and run. The words hit her like a physical blow. What? Arthur Russo was my father's primary accountant, Gabriel explained, his voice eerily calm. He was also a thief. Before he supposedly died in that crash, he embezzled $3 million from my family, money that belonged to the syndicate. He tried to run, and the men he owed money to caught him before my men could. Alice's world tilted. Her kind, quiet father, a Mafia accountant, a thief. No, that's impossible. We had nothing. We were broke. That's why my mother begged to work here. Your mother didn't beg, Gabriel corrected sharply. I brought her here. I allowed her to work off the interest of Arthur's debt by scrubbing my floors. But $3 million is a steep price. Alice, a maid's salary doesn't quite cover the principal. Gabriel pushed off the counter and walked slowly toward her, stopping only when he was inches away. He reached out, his knuckles brushing lightly against her cheek, wiping away a smear of chocolate. The touch burned her skin. I let you hide in the basement because I was waiting, Gabriel whispered, his voice dangerously soft. Waiting for you to grow up, waiting for you to become useful to me. And looking at you now, I see my patience has paid off. What do you want from me? Alice choked out, tears of genuine terror and confusion blurring her vision. Your days of eating scraps off my floor are over, Gabriel stated. Stepping back, he looked at his guards. Silvio, wake up the housekeeper. Tell her to move the girl into the East Wing master suite. Draw her a bath. Burn those rags she's wearing, and have the tailor here by 8 a.m. The East Wing, Silvio blurted out, clearly stunned. The East Wing was the private, heavily guarded sanctuary of the boss. Sir, are you sure? Do I stutter? Silvio. Gabriel snapped, his eyes flashing with lethal authority. The guard immediately bowed his head and practically ran from the kitchen. Gabriel turned his attention back to Alice, who was gripping the edge of the mahogany table so hard her knuckles were white. You owe me $3 million. Alice, Gabriel said, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. Starting tomorrow, you belong to me. You will act as my personal companion. You will attend every dinner, every gala, and every meeting by my side. You will smile when I tell you to smile, and you will speak only when spoken to. Why? She cried out, desperation breaking through her fear. Why would you want a maid's daughter at your side if my father stole from you? Why dress me up instead of putting a bullet in my head? Gabriel's smirk vanished, replaced by a look so deeply layered with secrets and danger that Alice felt a chill settle deep in her bones. He leaned over the table, his face inches from hers. Because, my sweet Alice, he whispered, in 2 weeks, I am going to war with the Costa cartel, and you happen to be the exact, identical twin of the woman who broke Vincente Costa's heart 5 years ago. You aren't just a maid's daughter anymore. You're the bait. With that, Gabriel turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving Alice sitting in front of a feast she could no longer stomach, entirely trapped in a golden cage of the Mafia boss's making. She had stepped out of the shadows, only to be dragged into the very center of a bloody, impending war. The east wing of the Moretti estate was a gilded cage designed to suffocate. Alice woke up the next morning, enveloped in imported Egyptian cotton sheets, staring up at a vaulted ceiling adorned with gold leaf trim. It felt like a tomb. Less than 24 hours ago, she was a ghost in the basement, starving and terrified. Now, she was the centerpiece of a deadly Mafia chess match. The heavy oak door creaked open, and her mother slipped inside. Maria looked 10 years older than she had the day before. Her housekeeper uniform was wrinkled, and her eyes were red-rimmed from crying. "Alice," Maria sobbed, rushing to the edge of the California king bed and gripping her daughter's hands. "My God, what has he done? I tried to stop them from bringing you up here. But Silvio threatened to lock me in the cellars. It's true, isn't it?" Alice's voice was hollow, devoid of the panic from the night before. "Dad stole from them. You knew." Maria flinched, looking away. "Arthur was a good man. Alice, he only took that money because he found out what the old Don Gabriel's father was planning to do to our neighborhood. He was trying to buy us a way out of the country. But they found him first." Before Alice could process the bitter reality of her father's sacrifice, the door swung open again. Gabriel stepped into the suite. He wore a charcoal bespoke suit, looking effortlessly powerful, a sharp contrast to the raw desperation radiating from the two women. "Maria," Gabriel said, his voice a smooth, dangerous drawl. "You have silver to polish in the main dining hall. Leave us." Maria hesitated, her maternal instinct briefly warring with her deeply ingrained terror of the boss. But one hard, unforgiving look from Gabriel sent her scurrying out the door, her head bowed in submission. Gabriel locked the door behind her and turned to Alice. "Get out of bed. Antoine is here." For the next 6 days, Alice was subjected to a grueling, meticulous metamorphosis. Gabriel's personal tailor, a severe French man named Antoine, took her measurements and returned with a wardrobe that cost more than her father's life insurance policy. But Gabriel wasn't just dressing her. He was molding her into a ghost. The woman who had broken Vincente Costa's heart 5 years ago was named Diana. She had been an Italian heiress, wild and untouchable, known for her fiery temper and her absolute refusal to submit to Vincente's tyrannical control. According to Gabriel, Diana had ultimately fled Houston with another man, driving Vincente to the brink of insanity. Alice didn't just share Diana's dark, cascading hair and piercing hazel eyes. She possessed the exact same bone structure, the same delicate curve of the jaw. Diana never slouched, Gabriel commanded one evening, pacing around the private library as Alice practiced walking in 6-inch Louboutins. She walked into a room like she owned the very air inside it. "Put your shoulders back. Lift your chin." Alice stopped, her feet aching, her patience snapping. "I am not her. Gabriel, if Vincente is as dangerous as you say, he's going to know I'm a fraud the second I open my mouth." Gabriel closed the distance between them in 2 long strides. He grabbed her chin, his grip firm but strangely gentle, forcing her to look up into his dark, storm-filled eyes. "You won't have to speak. You just have to stand by my side and look spectacular. Vincente is a man ruled by his obsessions. Seeing you will unravel his mind. It will make him reckless. and a reckless man makes mistakes. His thumb brushed against her lower lip. A fleeting, completely unscripted caress that sent a jolt of electricity straight to Alice's core. For a fraction of a second, the cold, calculating Mafia boss vanished, replaced by a man looking at her with a hunger that had absolutely nothing to do with syndicate wars. Gabriel quickly dropped his hand, clearing his throat and stepping back. "Tonight is the charity gala at the Palmer House Hilton," Gabriel announced, his tone entirely strictly business once more. "Vincente will be there. We have a public truce to maintain. You will wear the red silk gown." Hours later, Alice stood before the floor-to-ceiling mirror in her suite. She barely recognized herself. The crimson silk dress clung to every curve, daringly low in the back, pooling around her feet like liquid blood. Her hair was swept up into an elegant, intricate twist, with loose tendrils framing her face. Gabriel entered the room carrying a black velvet box. When he saw her, he stopped dead in his tracks. The breath hitched in his chest, his usually guarded expression shattering into sheer, undisguised awe. He walked up behind her, his reflection looming over her shoulder in the mirror. He opened the box, revealing a flawless, 50-carat diamond choker. Without a word, he reached around her neck and clasped the cold jewels against her skin. His warm hands lingered on her bare shoulders, his thumbs pressing lightly into her collarbone. "You look," Gabriel whispered, his voice incredibly thick. "Breathtaking." "I look like a target," Alice replied softly, meeting his gaze in the mirror. "I won't let anything happen to you," he vowed, and for the first time since she met him, Alice believed him. The Palmer House Hilton Grand Ballroom was a dazzling display of wealth and hypocrisy. Chandeliers dripped with crystal, illuminating a sea of politicians, socialites, and ruthless mobsters hiding behind tailored tuxedos and charitable smiles. A string quartet played Vivaldi over the hum of polite conversation. Gabriel kept his hand firmly on the small of Alice's back as they navigated the crowd. The moment she stepped into the ballroom, the atmosphere visibly shifted. Whispers erupted like wildfire. Heads turned. Alice felt the weight of 100 stares. But she kept her chin high, exactly as Gabriel had taught her. "He's here," Gabriel murmured, his grip on her waist tightening protectively. Alice followed his gaze. Standing near the towering champagne fountain was Vincente Costa. He was older than Gabriel, with silver dusting the temples of his dark hair and a jagged scar running along his jawline. He was laughing with a corrupt city alderman. But as his eyes swept over the crowd, they locked onto Alice. The crystal champagne flute slipped from Vincente's fingers. It hit the marble floor, shattering into 100 glittering pieces. The alderman stopped talking. The surrounding guests fell silent. Vincente looked as though he had seen a phantom step out of the grave. The color drained entirely from his face as he stared at the girl in the red silk gown. Gabriel smirked, a cruel, triumphant expression crossing his face. He leaned down, his lips brushing Alice's ear. "Checkmate." Vincente shoved past the alderman, ignoring the broken glass crunching beneath his leather shoes. He walked straight toward them, his chest heaving, his eyes wild and completely unhinged. Gabriel's bodyguards, Silvio and 2 others, immediately stepped forward, subtly sliding their hands into their jackets. "Diana," Vincente breathed, his voice trembling with a mixture of rage and profound heartbreak. He stopped 3 feet away, staring at Alice with a sickening intensity. How are you alive?" "Her name is Alice," Gabriel intervened smoothly, stepping slightly in front of her to shield her from Vincente's obsessive gaze. "And she is with me, Vincente. Watch your tone." Vincente's eyes snapped to Gabriel, absolute murder blazing in his pupils. "You son of a bitch! Where did you find her? This is a trick, a cheap, parlor trick." "It's no trick, just the woman I intend to marry," Gabriel lied, his voice echoing loudly enough for the surrounding mob bosses to hear. Alice's heart slammed against her ribs. Mari Vincente lost his mind. The carefully constructed public truce snapped in half. "She belongs to me," Vincente roared, plunging his hand into his tuxedo jacket. "Gun!" Silvio shouted. Chaos erupted. Screams tore through the ballroom as the string quartet abruptly stopped. Women in ball gowns dove behind velvet-draped tables. Before Vincente could fully draw his weapon, Gabriel moved with terrifying speed. He grabbed Alice by the waist, throwing her hard to the marble floor behind a massive marble pillar, just as the deafening crack of a gunshot shattered the air. Bullets chewed through the drywall and shattered the ornate mirrors along the walls. The smell of expensive perfume was instantly replaced by the sharp, metallic stench of gunpowder. "Stay down!" Gabriel roared over the gunfire, drawing his own customized Glock. Alice covered her ears, sobbing as glass rained down on her. She watched in horror as Gabriel stepped out from the cover of the pillar, firing precisely and mercilessly. Two of Vincente's men dropped to the floor, dead before they even hit the marble. "Gabriel!" Alice screamed, pointing behind him. Vincente had flanked them, his weapon aimed directly at Gabriel's back. Gabriel spun around, but he wasn't fast enough. Vincente fired. The bullet tore through Gabriel's left shoulder, spinning him violently, splattering dark blood across the white pillar. Gabriel didn't fall. Gritting his teeth in a snarl of pure adrenaline and rage, he raised his gun and fired 2 shots. The first blew Vincente's kneecap out. The second hit him squarely in the chest. The cartel boss collapsed backward into the destroyed champagne fountain. Dead. "Boss, we have to go. Police are 2 minutes out," Silvio yelled, providing cover fire as the remaining Costa men scrambled for the exits. Gabriel dropped his empty gun, clutching his bleeding shoulder. He reached down with his good arm, grabbing Alice and hauling her to her feet. "Run!" They fled through the service kitchens, a stark reminder of how Alice and Gabriel had first met, just a week prior, and burst into the frigid Houston night air. Silvio threw open the back door of a heavily armored black SUV. Gabriel practically threw Alice inside before climbing in after her, the tires screaming as the vehicle tore away from the curb. The ride to the safe house was a blur of flashing streetlights and the terrifying sound of Gabriel's ragged breathing. He was bleeding heavily, his charcoal suit soaked with dark, wet crimson. Alice tore the bottom ruffle of her expensive red silk gown, ignoring the ruined fabric, and pressed it hard against Gabriel's shoulder wound to staunch the bleeding. "Keep pressure on it," Silvio barked from the driver's seat. 20 minutes later, they arrived at an underground bunker, disguised as an abandoned warehouse in the South Loop. Silvio carried Gabriel to a medical cot in the back room, while Alice followed, her hands covered in his blood. A syndicate doctor was already waiting, immediately cutting away Gabriel's ruined jacket and going to work extracting the bullet. Alice paced the concrete floor outside the medical room for 2 agonizing hours. When the doctor finally emerged, nodding that Gabriel was stable and stitched up, Alice pushed past him and walked into the room. Gabriel was sitting up against the pillows, pale, his chest heavily bandaged, a glass of whiskey in his good hand. He looked up at her. Her red dress was torn and stained with his blood, her hair wildly undone, her makeup ruined. "Why did you do it?" Alice demanded, her voice shaking violently as she stood at the foot of his bed. "You told me I was just bait. You told me you needed him to make a mistake. You could have let him take me. You could have let him kill me. And you still would have had your justification for the commission to wipe out his cartel. Why did you jump in front of that bullet?" Gabriel set the whiskey glass down on the metal tray beside him. He stared at her. The cold, calculating Mafia Don entirely stripped away, leaving behind a man raw and exposed. "Because the plan changed," Gabriel said, his voice a gravelly whisper. "When?" Alice cried, tears finally spilling over her cheeks. "When did it change?" Gabriel pushed himself up, wincing in pain until he was sitting on the edge of the cot. He reached out, taking her bloody, trembling hands in his own. "It changed the moment I watched you eat cold risotto off my kitchen floor and look at me without an ounce of submission," Gabriel confessed, his dark eyes locking onto hers with a fierce, unwavering intensity. "I brought you upstairs to use you as a pawn. I intended to hand you over to Vincente, let him break the truce, and then slaughter him for it." He gently pulled her closer, his thumb tracing the tear tracks on her cheeks. "But then you put on that dress, and I realized that if Vincente Costa laid a single finger on you, I wouldn't just kill him. I would burn all of Houston to the ground." Alice's breath caught in her throat. The monster of the Midwest, the most feared man in the city, had just risked his empire and his life because he couldn't bear to lose her. "You owe me $3 million. Alice," Gabriel murmured softly, resting his forehead against hers. "But considering I just bought you with my blood, I think we can call the debt settled." Alice closed her eyes, wrapping her arms carefully around his uninjured side, finally stepping out of the shadows and fully into the dangerous, thrilling light of her new reality. She was no longer the maid's daughter, hiding in the basement. She was the woman who had broken the heart of a cartel boss and stolen the soul of a mafia king. And that is the incredible true story of how a starving maid's daughter went from hiding in the shadows to becoming the undisputed queen of the Houston underworld. Drop your thoughts on Gabriel's shocking ultimate move in the comments below. If this wild mafia romance kept you on the edge of your seat, please smash that like button, share this video with your friends, and hit subscribe for more unbelievable real-life stories.